What's going on, everybody?
What is going on?
It's Holy Week.
It's Holy
It
Week.
is. So we're feeling particularly reverent.
That's right.
I'm feeling a little more rebellious.
I'm thinking the same thing. Yes, yes. Welcome everybody. Welcome to our world.
Yeah.
This is it. Yeah, we are going to be a little bit reverent and rebellious today because we're going to talk about Easter.
Easter.
Yes, this is the third and final episode in our mini series.
I got a question for you.
Yeah,
All right. In the hierarchy of holidays,
yeah,
I feel like Christmas always takes the cake.
yeah.
It really does.
But I don't know, which would you, if you had to rank them? I mean, obviously the birth is very important, but the resurrection is very important.
Oh yeah.
So what do you think? Do you put Christmas a little bit above it?
I do
or-
not. I do not.
I like Christmas season better.
I do too.
Yeah.
But Easter
because it's a
is
season. I don't feel like we get a season of Easter.
Not really. I mean,
We
we
should.
actually
We
do.
should after
I mean,
we-
after what we went through.
I
Yeah.
feel like Easter is the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
It kind of is.
It ought to be 4 months long of celebrating.
Yeah.
It really.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
that's,
love the
yeah.
Easter time.
I do too.
I do
and,
too.
And I particularly love spring.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
the whole spring vibe. You know,
Yep.
when you get out there and you can smell all that stuff. And
Yeah.
that particular color of green that the grass turns.
Yeah.
And all the yellow in
Oh,
the cars.
my gosh. Yeah.
That
yeah.
John Deere green.
Yeah.
But I will say Christmas for me is more of a selfish thing. It's more of like the festivities. It's more of the family. It's more of
Yeah.
the movies and the vibe.
But here's the deal. Now, we've talked about this number of times, how in the early Christian world, Christmas was just not a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it was only about Easter. And here's the reason why. Because even though, I mean, Jesus was born of a human, we know that. But honestly, Jesus could have come to this earth in a number of different ways.
Absolutely, yeah.
There was only one way for him to conquer sin, death,
Yeah.
all that.
Man, that is true.
Yep.
That is true. I've
It
never
had
thought
to be
about
a
that.
perfect human, had to be a sacrifice, had to rise again.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, like, if the birth hadn't happened, they'd have figured something else.
Well, you know, I mean,
They
and
could've
that's
done
what
whatever.
a lot of people say. Well, you know, he wasn't really born of a virgin. He was, you know, whatever.
Well, the
but,
birth-
I mean, he was.
The birth is great.
Yeah,
it is
it's amazing,
amazing.
yes.
But the way he fulfilled everything
See, that's
is
the thing.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it is strictly divine.
And to be clear, Jesus' human birth did fulfill messianic prophecies.
Absolutely,
You know,
yes.
there's no doubt about that. But this one event is the only way that it could have been done.
Yep. Easter was like it was the big shebang.
So,
Yeah.
do you think, since Easter was around really before Christmas,
Yeah.
do you think that due to commercialism is why
Oh, man.
Christmas has overtaken Easter?
In America,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah, for sure.
And because you don't have to, you know, like Christmas season, you don't have to just have the Jesus narrative. In fact, you know, billions of people celebrate Christmas.
I used to work with an atheist that celebrated Christmas.
Absolutely.
Yep. I mean, we got Santa Claus on Coca-Cola commercials.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
you can do Christmas with Santa and reindeer and abominable snowman and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's true.
And,
Easter, I mean, I guess they can do the bunny, but I mean, at the sense,
But
Easter
really-
is.
Well, if you think about it, Easter's really it's ours. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Well,
It's
I mean,
Christians.
it's-
It's ours.
It's Jesus' resurrection.
yeah, it's ours.
Yeah,
we get ownership of
You can
that.
kind of cover it up with a bunny,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but you can't really celebrate Easter with just a bunny.
That's
Right.
true.
That's
I
ours.
feel like they've kind of tried to cover up the
I know.
stuff with a caricature.
Yeah,
like you
for
got
sure.
you got Santa, and again, I'm no hater of Santa. We celebrate
No,
Santa
it's okay.
Claus,
He's cool.
and the Easter Bunny. You know, we get an Easter basket for the kids, whatever. Like not mad at anybody.
You know
doing
what
that.
though? Peter made me mad all over again. Is about the hollow chocolate bunnies. I'm so mad about that because I got thinking about it. I was like,
know.
man, every time you get one, it's like, there's nothing.
Nothing but air.
Yeah.
You know, the creators of that love it.
Of course,
they're
yeah.
like, look at these idiots.
Yeah, they're like,
They're
look, they're
gonna
going
buy
to
it.
pay for this huge
I
thing,
know.
and there's really very little chocolate
I know.
involved.
And we all do the same thing too. We bite the ear, right? But the first thing we do is bite the ear, and then it's that hollow crunch, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. I'm getting like one candy bars with the chocolate
Yes.
out of this huge
If
bun.
that.
You need
I
to
know.
just save your time and get a Snickers bar.
Or just get those Cadbury eggs.
That's
you know,
right.
You know there's something inside.
Oh,
That
there.
is true.
Oh,
Yeah.
I stand corrected too. Last podcast, I said my wife likes Cadbury eggs, and she jumped all over me.
Uh-oh.
She does not like Cadbury eggs. It was my kids.
Oh.
And I'm like, excuse me, someone in the family likes Cadbury eggs. But yeah, she jumped all over me. She's like, I do not like those.
Now y'all don't like Peeps, do you?
No.
Not
All
even
right,
a
those
little.
are the
Now,
nastiest.
my oldest son enjoys Peeps.
Well,
He
my
li-
nephews love them.
I don't like marshmallow.
Have you ever
No.
put the Peeps in the microwave?
No, do they get huge?
No, they it's almost like they're like sparks going off. Really? It's creepy.
Is
Yeah.
it the sugar sparking
I'm sure
on
it
'em?
probably is.
Now I want to buy Peeps just to
I know.
microwave
I know.
'em.
You just
Well,
need to do
it's
that.
literally a marshmallow with sugar on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they just
Encrusted with sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Peeps are not my thing.
so let's
Yeah,
hear
mine
it.
either.
You got a good one for
yeah.
us tonight.
I
You
got a
just
joke.
primed us up before we got on the
This
show.
one comes from my big buddy Clyde.
Oh, Clyde.
Oh, he every now and then he'll come up with a really good one. So, how do you know when a turtle has been dead too long?
I don't know.
I have no idea.
Rigor tortoise has said it.
Why'd you?
That's just so stupid. That is funny.
You did that side look. That side
Rigor
eye.
tortoise.
Yes.
Good job.
Did he
Good job.
tell you that one just recently?
Okay.
Yesterday.
Okay,
Yesterday.
Clyde.
Yes.
Good job, Clyde.
Yes.
That tickled me.
You know what
Thanks.
I think we should have people send in jokes.
Man,
That would be
yes.
good.
That'd be a lot of fun.
If we could get some, when is the email set up?
It should be next week. I'm hoping
all
next
right.
week. yeah.
All right.
So, with that being said, hit the like button,
Yes.
hit the subscribe, hit the thumbs up, give us a good joke.
Before Rigor tortoise sets in.
Before it sets
submit to us a good joke.
Yes.
I
that's-
like that idea. Submit a joke, and I'm just checking, see if we had any good folks on this last one here.
I don't know.
Yeah, best joke we will read on there.
Jay Flash. Wonder if that's Jay from
Yep.
church.
It is. It
Yep.
is.
He said, "Nice episode, guys. Looking forward to next week." Jay, you're the man.
Yes.
He
He
commented. You get the shout out.
Jay, I talked to Jay. He's
Somebody
finally
has binge listening?
Yeah, he's finally caught up.
Yep.
And he said, "I can't believe no one commented on the last episode. I'm a comment." And I was like, "Do it."
Do it.
Yeah.
And he's a deviled egg man.
He is a deviled egg man.
Yep.
Who is not a deviled egg?
I don't
person.
know. I love deviled eggs.
I do too.
You know, my I think it was my middle. I don't know. One of my daughters used to call them church eggs because the only place she ever got them was at church.
Yeah. I figured that was like I was thinking more like one of the authors of an online thing that would be like, we don't eat deviled eggs
I
in this
know.
house.
We eat
church
Jesus eggs.
Yeah,
Church
Jesus
eggs.
eggs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Play into the Easter theme.
Yeah.
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 No, I
Easter
love
eggs.
them. I could eat my weight in deviled eggs.
I'll
I'm
have
with
some
you, man.
this weekend.
I'm with you.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I'll eat deviled eggs at any time.
Do
you
y'all
ever-
have big things going this weekend?
Church.
Yeah.
Any family gatherings?
Church and ham, I think. is
Church
what
and
we do.
ham?
Yeah.
So yeah, Saturday we'll be putting everything together, and
Yep.
Sunday is church. And other than after we leave church Sunday, it's up to my wife. Whatever
Yeah.
she tells me to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Have you ever had any really fancy deviled eggs where they try to upscale them a little bit?
I don't think so.
Man, I have.
What do you mean upscale?
Well, I'm talking about a deviled egg with a thin slice of smoked salmon and some capers.
No, I have not. No.
Why have I not had this?
It's really good.
Oh my god!
I know.
You hear that, people? Someone make me want some of those.
Where'd you have this?
It was some really fancy hotel where they had on Sunday they had a big brunch, and there was one with I forget what else was on it, but caviar was on it as well.
Never had caviar.
You never have?
Is it good?
I think it's delicious.
Isn't that eggs?
Yeah.
Fish eggs? Yeah.
Well, that ain't what they put on sushi, is it?
No. Well,
Sometimes they do.
kinda.
Yeah.
It's the ginger eggs. Is
Yeah,
that
when
what
they
call
put
them?
flying fish eggs on
Yeah.
there, the teeny tiny ones. Yeah, salmon roe,
What do
salmon
they
eggs.
taste like?
Fish eggs.
It's a mild fish flavor, but true caviar is not just the fish eggs. It is brined and cured.
The sauce.
Yeah, and so it is very salty.
Well, I like salty.
I do too.
I like sardines. So
I do too. You'd like caviar. You would love caviar.
I had it in Paris, and I was not a huge fan of it.
So name dropping, are we?
Yeah, he's getting fancy. Paris, Tennessee.
When I was in Paris.
when I was in Germany and Europe, my buddy Rabical, he loved caviar and calamari and all that stuff.
Oh man!
And here I am, this dumb guy from Tennessee. He's trying to educate me, right? And
elevate
I'm like,
your consciousness.
And I'm like, where's the beef? No, I'm not digging it. I tried it, and it's not bad. It just wasn't my cup of thing.
Well, it's okay. True caviar comes from Russia, and it's the eggs of a sturgeon.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Sturgeon, aren't they an invasive species?
I have no idea. Aren't Russians?
They definitely are.
The answer is yes.
Yeah,
they are.
So there you go.
Yeah,
we've solved that one. Yeah,
we're sorry, Russians. Keep watching.
Oh yeah. I don't
know. The other show to do, we've had some Russians tune in, and I'm always kind of like, I don't know if I like that.
Don't hack me.
Yeah, it's kind of
really.
When you see, because it says like Russian Federation or something is it'll tell you where they're listening. Mm-hmm. It's not a lot, but it's anytime it's those, and then what's the People's Republic of China?
Yeah.
When I see that on there too, I'm like, whoa, I don't know how I feel about that.
I accept them. I'm like, you come on over to this side.
No, I don't have a problem with them. I'm just like, what are they? Is this somebody actually listening, or are they like listening to me?
Yeah, they're gonna
listening in to me.
Gonna come over here and take your land.
Yes.
The answer again is yes.
Yes,
absolutely.
So what are we talking about?
We are actually. I'm been looking forward to this episode, and this is not going to be like all encompassing everything, but we're going to look at the evidence, the physical evidence for a literal resurrection of Jesus.
Dun,
Nice.
dun, dun.
Yeah. And because this is, Easter is always controversial for this particular topic because, everybody says, well, it's impossible.
He didn't really die.
Yeah. There's all kinds of ways that even biblical scholars, even Christian people are like, I can believe all this. I can't go that far.
I can't believe that there is this like back and forth amongst the Christian group.
Oh, it's quite amazing.
You know what I find funny is there's usually more scientific evidence for than there is Christian evidence for.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of what we're going to look at today is it's not Christian or non-Christian. It's just facts.
It's just the history, pretty much.
It's like the earthquake and things like that.
Yeah. And so I'm going to kind of, sort of guide us through this. And I want you guys to sort of supplement with all of the stuff that you either know from knowing or have looked up from looking up and all this stuff. Because
So what movie do you want to talk about?
Yes. I did jam Arise My Love today on the bulldozer.
there you go.
Nice.
I did wear my T-shirt.
Yeah, I like it.
He is
He is
risen.
risen.
Yes. Probably can't really see it, but it says Rizzin.
Yeah.
So
He is the hippest of the three
He
of us.
really
here, so-
is. He's the Fonzie of the group.
Yes. How does that feel?
I'm really just not sure. I've never really considered myself all that hip.
Hey.
But,
Did
yeah.
it
You got it,
surprise
man.
you? Did you think coming in here with me and Pat that you would be the most hip?
I thought I would be the old guy.
No, we're the lame ones. We're
We
lame.
are. Yes.
I don't know. But anyway, so we're going to kind of come at this from looking at the three topics. Okay, so and this is the first one. Did Jesus really rise from the dead, or was he just resuscitated?
Yeah.
So, in other words, was Jesus really dead?
Or CPR'd.
Yeah.
So only mostly
Okay.
dead.
So,
You found the movie. Good job.
mostly dead. That's right. I've got this little book here, and I've read through it a couple of times, and I want to draw out some points that the book draws out. There's some really good stuff in here, but we'll start this way. The idea that Jesus never really died on the cross can be found in the Quran, which was written in the 7th century. In fact, a certain sect of Muslims contend that Jesus actually fled to India. In fact, there's a shrine in India that supposedly marks his real burial place in Kashmir.
Good Zeppelin song.
How about that? Yeah.
Wow.
Then there's these other philosophers and theologians, things like that. They try to explain away the resurrection by suggesting that Jesus only fainted from exhaustion on the cross, or he had been given a drug that made him appear to die.
All right, so
Now,
this
go ahead.
bothers me though. How can a theologian think this? Because this like basically undoes the whole point.
This is my question. So this idea was formulated in the 7th century.
Yeah.
So 700 years after the fact, we can safely say this is nothing more than speculation.
That's it.
Nothing more than speculation.
That's it.
That's like me saying, well, George Washington was kind of a jerk. Well, how do you know that, Pat? I don't.
Yeah,
it's like that's what it comes down to.
But this gets me though, because it's like the death was a necessary part of
That's right.
this process.
But just so you know, there is a school of theology in our modern time that basically says the entire Bible is allegory, and there's some good concepts in it, but none of this stuff ever really happened.
Even though it's
And they claim to be Christian.
Yes,
even though
they
it's
sure do.
Even though it's refuted, like it's backed up by like Roman literature and
say historic,
documents
yeah.
and other
Well,
things like that.
we're talking even back to Moses and Abraham and Jonah, and
Right. But that's also refuted through Egyptian documents.
Well, and
things
I've,
like that.
I've had people try to argue the flood with me. And
Oh,
they're
for
like,
sure.
oh, that
Yeah.
didn't really happen.
And the biggest controversy these days is the Exodus. That there's no physical evidence for the Exodus, the Red
Really?
Sea and the
Yeah.
Mount Sinai and all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So it shouldn't surprise any of us that even Christian theologians would say this is a story. It was a necessary story, but and of course we went through those myths and legends and
Yeah.
things like
Yep.
that. That they
yeah.
say, oh well, it just copies this story from over here and that story from over
Yeah.
there. All these resurrection kinds of things, and it's just it's a new birth, it's new life, it's all this stuff.
Okay, we're going to take up a donation to send us to the Red Sea, and we'll approve this.
There you go. There you go.
I will dive to the bottom.
we're going
and
to keep
find the
saying
chariots.
this stuff. And we're going to, someday, we're going to like get a call and be like, somebody has mysteriously donated like a large amount just
I
for
know.
y'all to go. And then we're going to be like, oh, well, we actually have to
Yeah,
go now.
now we gotta
If
go.
that's the
Yeah.
case, I would truly dive to the bottom of the Red Sea.
This could be the Reverent and Rebellious tour.
Yeah.
And so we can go to whatever that place in Italy was.
Yeah, yeah.
Transylvania.
Transylvania,
and Red
yep.
Sea. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do
it. But conspiracy theorists bolstered this hypothesis by pointing out that Jesus had been given some liquid on a sponge. Remember that?
Yeah. The
Gall.
What was it? The what was the branch called?
Hyssop.
Hyssop branch.
Yeah, it was.
So they said it wasn't vinegar.
Well,
Bitter
they
wine.
said that there was some sort of drug in the liquid.
Anesthesia.
Yeah. And they said, Pilate was so surprised at how quickly Jesus was dead. Like he shouldn't have been dead, and he was dead.
Oh, even though he got whipped and beat.
I was going to say he was beat half to death
But
already.
you remember that they had to break the legs of the other two
Yeah.
to make them die quicker because it was getting close to sundown.
But
Yeah.
they didn't get whipped and beat.
Well, they would have to some degree.
Yeah, but I mean, we know that Jesus took the most
Oh, yeah.
past
Oh,
Roman legal.
All right, and that is one
standards.
thing I want to say, and I'm not going to beat this dead horse. We talked about the Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
That was for me one of the
I
biggest
know.
things when you could physically see
I
the
know.
beating that he
Yeah.
took. That's
Yeah.
when I was like, good
And,
Lord.
when they made the movie, he was wearing a bodysuit. Mm-hmm. And they said that actually, accidentally, one of those strokes actually got his skin.
That's what I heard. It missed and hit his ribs.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And-
And he had to recover for 3 days.
What
They
was
had
the
to stop
Roman
shooting.
law that they can get whipped 39 and a half?
39 and a half, yeah.
Yeah. And we know that he went past that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This guy says in 1929, D.H. Lawrence wrote a short story in which he suggested that Jesus fled to Egypt where he fell in love with the priestess Isis. That sounds perfectly plausible.
Yeah, I mean, that lines up.
I mean, Look at the evidence. Oh, wait. It's not in there. Yeah.
I feel like some of this is like stuff they just hope
Sci-fi, man.
Yeah.
This is 7th century sci-fi.
Well, then there was a book in 1965. It was a bestseller called The Passover Plot. It alleged that it was only the unanticipated stabbing of Jesus by the Roman soldier that foiled his complicated scheme to escape the cross alive. And then he said in the review of this, in response to a review, he says, "We are nowhere claiming that the book represents what actually happened."
So
I just sold a book. That's what it is, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I'm going to write a book, viewers. It's going to be called Pat's Right, Everyone Else is Wrong.
yeah, then there was a book called The Jesus Scroll in 1972. In 1982, Holy Blood, Holy Grail says that Pontius Pilate had been bribed to allow Jesus to be taken down from the cross before he was dead. And then they said we could not and still cannot prove the accuracy of our conclusion. So
even though Pontius Pilate was like under the microscope from Rome he was the governor of this very spot in Israel that was like it was a super important role.
Absolutely.
So he's just going to get bribed and...
Yeah, he's going to, help Jesus not die so that they can start some religion.
Yeah.
That sounds perfect.
knowing that if things go south,
logical.
he would be killed.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So,
Wow.
yeah, this is called the swoon theory.
Okay.
That Jesus swooned. He didn't actually die. And that when he got into the cold, damp air of the tomb, it helped revive him.
Wow.
And and then he must have pushed the stone away.
Man, it really revived
The
him.
cemented in stone. Yeah. He's
The sealed,
Yeah.
sealed
Not only
giant
did it
stone.
revive him, but it was like straight
superhuman
up.
strength.
Yeah, HGH pumped in his veins.
Right, exactly. So the author of this book, Lee Strobel, is the author. The first thing he did was interview this guy, this doctor, Alexander Metherell.
Hey, which we didn't tell the cool part about Lee Strobel's background.
Oh, yeah. Lee Strobel wrote a book called The Case for Christ. He was a staunch atheist. By his own admission, was abusive and a drunkard. And he didn't believe in any religion because there was no evidence. He was a lawyer and a journalist.
Yep.
And then his wife became a Christian, and that messed up his world pretty bad. And so he set out to disprove the religion that she had embraced.
That should give a wife or your spouse hope there. Hey, don't give up on them.
That's exactly right.
We talked about this before we got on there, too. We're talking about the book, not the film. The film is very Hollywoodized, very light.
Now, read the book. Read
the book. It's very in-depth.
So he took some of the elements from his book, The Case for Christ. He was particularly interested in the resurrection.
Yeah.
And so he wrote The Case for Easter. And this is where a lot of our material is going to come from today.
Gotcha.
So he interviews Dr. Alexander Metherell and says...
and this is a medical doctor, correct?
It's not just a medical doctor. He has... okay, so here's some of his a medical degree, a doctorate in engineering, board certified in diagnosis by the American Board of Radiology, a consultant to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of the National Institutes of the Health of Bethesda, Maryland, former research scientist who has taught at the University of California. It goes on and on and on.
So
he's got a few
qualified.
creds
So
to
he's
his name.
qualified, we can say.
Totally qualified.
He's the guy.
Yeah.
He made meth.
Yeah, he's Metherell. Yeah. So he now listen to this. He describes the events leading up to Jesus' death. So he says it began after the Last Supper. Jesus went with his disciples to the Mount of Olives, specifically to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he prayed all night. During that process, he was anticipating the coming events of the next day. Knowing the amount of suffering he was going to have to endure, he was quite naturally experiencing a great deal of psychological stress.
Is this the sweating blood?
Yes. So the Gospels say he began to sweat blood.
What is it, hematosis?
Hematidrosis.
Hematidrosis.
Yeah.
Hydrosis.
It's not very common, but it is associated with a high degree of psychological stress. Severe anxiety causes the release of chemicals that break down the capillaries in the sweat glands. As a result, there's a small amount of bleeding into these glands, and the sweat comes out tinged with blood.
Dang.
I was a correctional officer at West 10 Pen down here in Henning. Worked there for about 6 months, and there was 2 inmates who both had that condition.
Oh, man.
They would sweat and they would sweat blood.
Golly.
Yeah, I've seen it with my own eyes.
But then he says that it sets up the skin because of the sweat glands and the blood. The skin becomes very fragile, very thin. So it'd be very sensitive. So you think about then you think about the flogging. So it says Roman floggings were known to be terribly brutal. They usually consisted of, like you said, 39 and a half lashes. But frequently, we are a lot more than that, depending on the mood of the soldier applying the blows.
It was with the cat of nine tails, right?
Yeah, and this is
Glass shards and stuff in
a
there.
whip of braided leather thongs with metal balls woven into them. So the balls cause deep bruises, contusions, and it would just sort of break the skin open. They wouldn't
That's
cut
the thing.
skin.
Yeah, it was not a slice. It was
Gotcha.
a bursting of the skin.
And then they had pieces of sharp bone as well. So they would hit and they would drag.
Yep.
Yeah. It says the back would be so shredded that part of the spine was sometimes exposed by the deep, deep cuts. The whipping would have gone all the way from the shoulders down to the back, the buttocks, and the back of the legs.
You ever get spanked by your parents, and they ended up getting the back of your thighs?
that hurts,
You know
man.
how much that hurts?
Yeah.
Could you imagine this situation?
No.
Are you kidding me?
No.
And this guy knows one physician who has studied Roman beatings. Why you would do that, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
He got whipped really bad one day, and he was like, I just wonder if this is as bad as they
yeah.
He was Steve
Answer
Martin
is
from
no.
Little Shop
Yeah.
of Horrors.
Yes.
So it says, as the flogging continued, the lacerations would tear into the underlying skeletal muscles and produce quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh.
Who comes up with this stuff?
I don't know, man.
You have to be a seriously devoted person to torture to think
All the time.
how
yeah.
can I make this worse for you?
Yeah.
How can I bring you up to the point of death without dying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can I kill you without killing you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it says the sufferer's veins were laid bare, and the very muscles, sinews, and bowels of the victim were open to exposure.
Sinews are tendons, man.
Yeah,
And your bowels are open.
exactly.
Yeah.
So many people, he said, would die from this beating before they were even crucified.
Right.
But at the least, the victim would experience tremendous pain and go into hypovolemic shock.
Yeah. Could you imagine how much blood loss was there?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, good
So
Jesus.
hypo means low, vol refers to volume, and emic means blood. So it means that you're suffering the effect of losing a large amount of blood.
Yeah.
So the heart races to try to pump blood that isn't there. The blood pressure drops, causing fainting or collapse. And the kidneys stop producing urine to maintain what volume is left. And fourth, the person becomes very thirsty as the body craves fluids to replace the lost blood volume.
Now, I can say this from personal experience. I've seen people, I'm a giver of blood and pre-deployment checks. I've seen people pass out from giving blood.
Oh, yeah.
It would happen to me, I would venture
Like,
to say.
I've seen this happen. And this is like giving
A pint.
a pint, you know, or taking a couple vials.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you imagine getting whipped and beat and just shedding your blood on the
just
ground?
blood everywhere.
Yeah.
And okay, side note, it says that that Peter, who denied him, was sitting across the courtyard watching this.
Jeez. I couldn't, man. Couldn't do it.
Oh my God.
Good thing you're Peter, not me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but
I'm not in the scripture.
I wouldn't have denied him. Yeah.
Oh no, I would have been screaming like a little girl running.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So the question then he asked is do you see evidence of this condition in the gospel accounts? And he says yes. Jesus was in hypovolemic shock as he staggered up the road to the execution site at Calvary.
Hence why he needed Simon to
Collapsed.
help him.
Yep, it collapsed. And then later we read that Jesus said, I thirst. At which point that drug was given.
I thirst for some drugs.
Yeah.
So there's no question that Jesus was already in serious bad condition, critical
Hypovolemic shock.
condition. Yeah. Before the nails were driven through his hand and feet. So then,
And so now there's a question of why he didn't last that long on the cross.
oh, exactly.
It makes no sense.
How certain was death once he got on the cross? How, it's like, how certain was death? No,
Guaranteed.
well, eventually,
Yeah.
eventually you would just,
Suffocate. Yeah.
So
Hey, you know what we were supposed to do this week?
what? Oh,
Crucify him!
him.
Yeah.
Just feels bad.
It does.
It just doesn't feel good.
And that's the funny thing is, well, not funny, but that's the amazing thing is those words, crucify him, set that process in motion.
Yep.
They didn't say crucify him and then they nailed him to the cross. It was that whole flogging process.
Yeah.
So they knew exactly what was going to happen.
Do you think any of the people watching that had been shouting it were watching and were like, that's it, that's enough.
I was
like,
just
he's had
thinking
enough.
that. I want to know from the people that were screaming crucify him up to the point of crucifixion, if they followed through with it.
Yeah.
I want to know if they were thinking, oh no, like I messed
But
up.
they,
Yeah,
he's
had enough.
They
Yeah.
witness stuff like this all the time, and if they truly believed that you were guilty, then they would stand there and watch.
Yeah.
Like you get stoned to death, and getting stoned to death is that's
sounds
a whole
terrible.
other process.
Man,
Yeah.
and
It's terrible.
I think of it in a modern context. Like a lot of people say they would like to go to an execution, like an electric chair, lethal injection. Are you freaking kidding me?
They'd like to go to that.
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing: is like I sit next to my grandfather as he flatlined. I sit next to my mother, my father, as both of these people died.
Yeah.
There's nothing cool about it.
No.
You know what I mean? Like you do not want to
sometimes,
be in that situation.
No,
Yeah.
over the last 8 years, I've been in so many rooms where people have died.
Right, and-
Sometimes it's a relief. Sometimes it's just like super peaceful.
Well, even
But even then,
regardless of what happens to them, like regardless if they're at peace now and all that, but the effect on you,
I know because there's something alive that's not alive anymore.
watching a
I know.
human being perish,
Yeah.
like it's hard for me to wrap my brain around that.
It's tough. It's one of the toughest things ever. Then when they got to the site, he would have been laid down. His hands would have been nailed in the outstretched position to the horizontal beam. This is called the patibulum. Now it's not. It's separate from the post. The post is already in the ground.
Yeah, it's the crossbeam.
Yeah, it's a crossbeam. That's exactly right. And they used spikes that were 5 to 7 inches long, tapered to a sharp point, driven through the wrists.
And then bent over. Mm-hmm. And is driven through this part, right?
Yes,
That's what I
exactly.
thought, yeah.
And so
Because it would tear out of your hands.
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And they called everything up to the elbow your hand.
Yep.
That's why it says
Gotcha.
yeah. So when Jesus showed his wounds, his scars, it would have been in his wrist. Yeah. So this is the interesting thing about this is the nail goes through the place where the median nerve runs.
Extremely painful.
So imagine, the feeling you get when you bump your elbow and hit your funny bone. That is like multiplied by 1,000.
Yep.
Because that's that same nerve.
Yep.
that
And
goes there.
constant. There's no bump and then it's over.
No, the nerve is being crushed by the nail.
Yeah.
And so, it's the ulnar nerve. Mm-hmm. He says, picture taking a pair of pliers and squeezing and crushing that nerve. That would be similar. Pain was absolutely unbearable. In fact, it was beyond words to describe. They had to invent a new word, excruciating.
That's where it comes from.
Excruciating means out of the cross.
Wow.
And then also the way they crucified you, the way they put your feet, they crossed them. Like if this was your feet, they cross them this way and they drive them through your Achilles tendon.
Yeah, well, it says right here.
To the heel.
Jesus was hoisted as the crossbar was attached to the vertical stake. Then the nails were driven through Jesus' feet. Again, the nerves in his feet would have been crushed, and there would have been a similar type of pain.
Well, I knew they did it in a way too, where like you need to raise yourself up to get air.
Yep.
Yeah, it talks about this too. But before
But it kills the strength in your legs.
Yeah.
So you're just suffocating, fighting against it the whole time.
yeah.
Yeah.
But here's what happens before that. His arms would have been immediately been stretched. Both shoulders would have been
Dislocated.
Dislocated.
Yep.
Yeah. This fulfilled the Old Testament prophecy in Psalm 22, and we'll get to Psalm 22 in a minute because there's so much stuff in Psalm 22. It's a foretelling of the crucifixion. It really is.
And this is that no bone would be broken?
This is my bones are out of joint.
Gotcha.
That's what it says. In fact,
Gotcha.
I've got this little parallel thing going here that says, it says, I am poured out like water and all my bones are out of joint. That's what it says. So,
And funny enough, too, when the way they drove the nails would not pierce bone, it would separate bone.
exactly.
It would be in between bones.
That's it.
Yeah.
Because there's all those narrow bones in there. Yeah. So once a person is hanging in the vertical position, crucifixion is an agonizingly slow death by asphyxiation.
Yeah.
Because in order to exhale, the individual must push up on his feet so the tension on the muscles would be eased for a moment. In doing so, the nail would tear through the foot, locking up against the tarsal bones. After managing to exhale, the person would then be able to relax down and take another breath in. But then you have to push up again. And every time you would do that, you scrape your back against the
It's
cross.
freaking already shredded.
Already raw meat. That's exactly right. Complete exhaustion takes over. You won't be able to push up anymore. And you go into what is called respiratory acidosis.
Yep. And it's essentially very, very shallow breaths. Like,
Carbon dioxide in the blood is dissolved as carbonic acid, causing the acidity of the blood to increase.
Yep.
Irregular heartbeat. And at that moment, Jesus would have known he was at the moment of death, which is when he said, Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit. And then he died of cardiac arrest. How about that?
Crucifixion, I was just curious. It was invented by the Persians.
Wow.
It says between 300 and 400 BC.
yep.
It is quite possibly the most painful death ever invented by humankind.
Persians invented it, Romans perfected it.
But then, heart failure, resulting in the collection of fluid in the membrane around the heart, called a pericardial effusion.
Yep. Or the pleural C sac.
Which, as well as around the lungs, which is called a pleural effusion. That's when
Education for Pat.
There you go. They, being fairly certain that Jesus was dead, they confirmed it by thrusting a spear into his right side
And then the fluid and blood came out.
between the ribs. Apparently went through the right lung and into the heart, so that when the spear was pulled out, some fluid, pericardial effusion and the pleural effusion came out. This would have the appearance of a clear fluid like water, followed by a large volume of blood.
We actually quoted that in the Army at basic training. It's you would stab between the second and third rib. So it would hit the lung and the heart.
Yeah, there you go. So John says he saw blood and water come out. And they said, well, but wait, didn't he see water then blood come out? It's like, he didn't write that way. Blood was more important than water. And so he describes, and it was a more volume of blood than water. So that's why he wrote it that way.
And blood and water don't mix.
And no, they don't. You're right. Exactly right. So at the end of this interview, he said, at that point, what would Jesus' condition have been? And this highfalutin doctor said, there was absolutely no doubt that Jesus was dead.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't see how any medical professional could say otherwise. I just don't see how.
And so then the further evidence that he was really dead is they went and broke the legs of the other two that were being crucified with him. They did not break Jesus' legs.
Because he was dead.
No point in breaking a dead man's legs.
That's exactly right. And that fulfilled another prophecy, which is that his bones wouldn't, the bones of the Messiah would remain unbroken, is what it says. Yeah.
You know, when I was looking up that crucifix, who invented it thing,
Yeah.
you know how Google has little questions there? The first one here says, was Jesus crucified according to history? And just the little brief Google snippet. And it's Google, you know, people have mixed up. It says, most scholars in the third quest for the historical Jesus consider the crucifixion indisputable.
Yeah, I think the most disputable fact of Jesus' crucifixion would be the shape of the cross.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We can go into that, but that's a whole nother rabbit trail. And I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, it doesn't.
No.
I think that's the most, I think that's the best grounds for an argument
Was
that
it a
someone
T?
can have.
Was it a straight pole?
Yeah, was it
a
lowercase or
cross?
uppercase
Yeah,
T?
exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Who cares?
So, but here's some practical evidence And that is, this guy says, I'll grant you. The question was, how do we know they weren't just mistaken? He said, I'll grant you that these soldiers didn't go to medical school, but remember that they were experts in killing people.
Yep.
That was their job, and they always did it very well. They knew without a doubt when a person was dead, and it's really not that difficult to figure out.
Especially if you pierce their heart with a spear.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And then the fact that someone petitions to take the body off the cross.
We're gonna get into that, too.
Okay.
That
Sorry.
comes in the next section.
Sorry, I'm not trying to jump the gun.
No, this is fascinating. It really is. But then he says, if a prisoner somehow escaped, the responsible soldiers would be put to death themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they had a huge incentive to make absolutely sure that every victim was dead when he was removed from the cross.
So they didn't suffer the same fate.
Exactly.
And that's why I say, like, Pontius Pilate wouldn't have been in a part of a grand scheme to save this guy he didn't know.
Yeah.
Think
because he knew
think about
he'd be
this
killed.
going into it, too. Pontius Pilate morally and legally washed his hands of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
You know, because he said, I find no fault in this man. If you want to crucify him, crucify him.
Yep.
I wrote what I wrote.
Yep.
He legally and morally took his hands off of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was a little bit of a coward, really, honestly.
Yeah, he was. He was.
He could have just
He could have stopped it.
said, no,
Yeah.
we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So he says, is there any possible way that Jesus could have survived this? And he said, absolutely not.
No.
He was already in hypovolemic shock from the massive blood loss even before the crucifixion started. He couldn't possibly have faked his death because you can't fake the inability to breathe for long.
Yeah.
And then the spear. And so he says, when someone suggests to you that Jesus swooned on the cross, he says, I tell him it's impossible.
You know, and when we think about this, right, Jesus could have died 3 different ways. He could have died from the beating, period. Did not need the crucifixion, did not need the spear. He could have died just from the crucifixion, not from the beating, not from the spear. Or he could have just died from the spear, not from the crucifixion, or not
Any
from the
one of
beating.
those things.
Yeah.
All 3 of these things are fatal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to question it.
So then he caps it all off with this. This is my favorite part. So it says, okay, so let's just imagine for a moment that Jesus somehow survived.
He's Superman. Got it.
Somehow. He says,
Body armor.
You know, what condition would he been in after he tracked down his disciples?
Not very good.
He would have been mad as a mug.
Well, it says,
He'd have been dragging himself.
it says, if he had, how could he walk around after nails had been driven through his feet?
Yeah.
How could he have appeared on the road to Emmaus just a short time later, just a couple of days later,
Just bebopping around.
And
strolling for long distances?
Yeah.
How could he use his arms after they were stretched and pulled from their joints? Remember, he also had massive wounds on his back and a spear wound to his chest. Active wounds, not healed wounds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I feel like it's not hard to poke holes in that argument.
no, he says a person in that kind of pathetic condition would never have inspired his disciples to go out and proclaim that he's the Lord of life who had triumphed over the grave.
Could
Yeah.
you imagine?
Look at me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing all right, guys.
No,
That's
they would
Freddy
have
Krueger going to talk to the bird unit, man.
Yeah.
That's,
they would have felt sorry for him and tried to nurse him back to health.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
man.
So, so that takes care of that. Now let's go to the second question, which is, was the tomb really empty? Was
Okay.
Jesus' body really absent from the tomb?
So this is like the CIA side of it.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Was there just, some sort of way that, they just concocted this whole thing. They
Right.
made up the story that Jesus appeared alive. He never came out of the tomb.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, the interesting thing about this is he actually interviews this other guy, but this goes back to Paul. Now, I want to set this up. I would never have gone to Paul for evidence of the resurrection. I would think it would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right?
Yeah.
John gives us the most robust account. Matthew gives us a very detailed account.
But it goes to Paul.
It goes to Paul, which is so interesting. Paul says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You're still in your sins. This is in 1 Corinthians. I'm gonna try to see if I can. 1 Corinthians 15. Paul talks about the resurrection. He talks about how Jesus appeared to him and to all these others and everything else. He says, I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And then he goes here, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles, and last of all, as it were to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. And we'll get to all this in the third section, but I wanted to set that up. And the reason that they're using Paul,
because Paul's like, there's living people who've seen this.
and Paul's letters were the first scripture that we had.
Right.
And so the Gospels weren't written until later.
Right.
But Paul's letters and the book of Acts were like written super early. So Paul would be writing this right here within, at the very most, 3 years after the
Crucifixion.
resurrection.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So if you're going to look at historical evidence, you go back to the oldest possible accounts.
And it'd be Paul. Yeah. Okay.
And it's all
That
about
makes sense.
Paul. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna get to why that's important.
And it's interesting too that Paul's like, look, go ask Jimmy, Frank,
Exactly.
and Bill.
Yeah.
They were there. They
That's
seen
the
it.
key. That's the
Yeah.
key right there. And we'll find out in the next section that this here is actually a creed, a creed that would have been that Paul is repeating. He probably came up with the creed, or at least a council of people came up with the creed. But this is a
Paulinian creed.
it really is, and it would have been like incorporated into the early Christian worship services, recited by them, memorized by them.
Gotcha.
This is not just Paul firing off a letter.
Yeah.
This is a creed that's dropped into this letter to the Corinthians.
Gotcha.
So I want to kind of set that up. In this section, he interviews Dr. William Lane Craig. Now, he's pretty well known in Christian circles. I've watched a lot of his videos. I've read some of his books. He is a super brilliant guy. I
call him Willie Craig.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He does a lot of debates with atheists. And honestly, they have, panels of judges, and I think he's undefeated. I mean, I really think that, because they come to the end of the debate and they go, let's see, 4 out of 5 of us think, most of the time. In fact, in a very famous debate, this was probably one of the most hotly contested debates. There were 5 judges. 4 say William Lane Craig unequivocally won the debate. 1 said it was a draw. Probably an atheist.
Probably.
That's pretty close. That's pretty close.
It says here about this debate. I'm trying to figure out who he was debating at this one. Anyway, he says, among those who had entered the auditorium that evening as avowed atheists, agnostics, or skeptics, an overwhelming 82% walked out concluding that the case for Christianity had been the most compelling. 47 people entered as non-believers and exited as Christians.
Wow.
That's how persuasive his arguments for the faith were. And
Is he still living?
Yeah, he is. He's still active. And he says, by the way, I know of nobody who became an atheist.
I think it was Christopher Hitchens was who he debated.
It might have been. I know he's debated him.
Or Richard Dawkins.
I was going to say Richard Dawkins is like the
Yeah,
worst.
they were the 2 big ones.
Gosh, he's the one I've seen him even on like social media. I want to say, I'm pretty sure it was Richard Dawkins, but he's
I punched
even
him
like,
in his left ear once.
Did you?
No.
So
You hear that, Richard Dawkins? If you want me to, I will.
So here's a list of his degrees. A Master of Arts degree from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Birmingham, England, another doctorate in theology from the University of Munich, and then taught at all these different places. I'm not even going to go through them. He knows what
It
he's
ain't
talking
Joe
about.
Blow off the street.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So we know that typically people who were crucified were not buried.
Correct.
At the very most, they would dig a hole and throw them in it. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, they were just left on the cross or on the side of the road for the animals to eat. Mm-hmm. That's typically what happened.
The most disgraceful way possible.
And William Lane Craig says, if all you looked at was customary practice, that would be what happened. but that would ignore the specific evidence in this case. So there's an immediate problem with the specific evidence because the Gospels say that Jesus' corpse was turned over to Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the very council, the Sanhedrin, that voted to condemn Jesus.
That's right.
So how could Joseph have voted to condemn Jesus in the Sanhedrin and then go do this wonderful act of, compassion?
Well, that's because you have the major Sanhedrin and the minor Sanhedrin, and also, too, this trial happened at night. It didn't happen with all the Sanhedrin members present.
Right, and he goes into this creed that Paul talks about. So he says, Paul says he was buried, but he doesn't say a tomb. And he doesn't say anything about Joseph, this mysterious character, claims the body. And so he says, I need to find, here's the part about Joseph. Mark says that the entire Sanhedrin voted to condemn Jesus. So if that's true, then Joseph voted. Okay. Luke may have felt this same sort of ambiguity, which would explain why he added one more important detail.
Ambiguity.
Yes.
Exactly what I thought when you said that.
Sorry.
That word has been ruined for me.
Joseph of Arimathea wasn't present when the official vote was taken.
Yeah, because it was at night.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So he was snoozing.
Apparently.
Apparently him and Nicodemus were.
Yeah.
They showed up
They
next day and were like,
excused
what the
themselves.
heck happened
And,
around
and if
there?
you think about it, it makes sense because we know Nicodemus was a secret follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
And we can assume, since Joseph of Arimathea gave the tomb for Jesus, that he was as well. So they wouldn't be present.
Do you think they were asleep, or do you think they were like, we're just not showing up?
I think they were not showing up because it says specifically about Joseph, and it implies this about Nicodemus. It says that he was a secret disciple. Mm-hmm. So it was certainly a believer. And
But
so
they weren't about to.
I think
So
they're
do
going
you-
like, man, it's just all this pollen around the springtime. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it tonight.
So are they as bad as Pontius, though? 'Cause
No, they're believers, so they would not be present for the vote because they knew how it was going to go,
Yeah.
Yep.
and
It
they
was
would
a
be
majority-
pressured.
Yep. And it was a majority rule, too.
So,
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
even
but-
if they had shown up and said no.
Yeah,
Oh,
they
then
just would have got
But
cast out.
they would turn on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just like, no, we can do more good
Yep.
by abstaining.
And that comes with the burial too, as well, because like we learn how much frankincense and myrrh and aloes, how much they anointed him,
Oh yeah,
and that lines up perfectly with Scripture.
absolutely.
Well, but
they
now,
were needed for that.
would it have raised eyebrows for him to give him a tomb?
Yes, it did. Which is really what proves that he's actually real, because the Christians would not have come up with this.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he was a
'Cause
Jewish
they knew.
leader.
They'd have been like, man, this will
That's
never
exactly
work.
right. He says it's highly improbable they would have invented one who did the right thing by giving Jesus an honorable burial.
That's right.
Yeah.
Especially while all of Jesus' disciples deserted him. Like, where were they?
Yeah.
They didn't ask for his body.
Yep. And
So-
also too, something that's very, very interesting. Now this is speculation, but Jesus being a carpenter, most of their work was masonry work. Most of that job was digging tombs. It's very likely, or at least probable, should I say, not likely. It's very probable Jesus dug his own tomb.
Well, it sounds a little dogwood-ish,
I've
but it's a
heard-
little more plausible than that.
I've heard a lot of theories about it.
It's very possible. I mean,
And even if it's not true, it's pretty cool.
yeah.
The movie fan side of me, you know what I wish? Like, I wish, and it would have, and this is why, like you say, I agree, the Christians couldn't have come up with this, because in my mind, what I would have liked is like Jesus to be there, but see John and Nicodemus there and being like, no, and and they go down with him, because he's not, and his disciples stand up and go down with the man.
Yep.
Peter said that's what he was going to do.
Yeah, and then
Well-
and we see it doesn't happen.
Also,
Not at all.
too, keep in mind, too, Jews were very decisive. Jews were very, at this point, it's like, okay, we know how this is going out. I'm not showing up. I'm
Yeah.
not going.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait till after this happens, and then I can do something.
Yeah.
They were very decisive.
Well, so William Lane Craig says that the creed of Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 definitely implies the empty tomb, mainly because it says that he was buried. And the Jewish concept of burial, and then when it talks about the resurrection and all that kind of stuff, for them, the resurrection was the bones of the deceased, not the flesh. So when they buried somebody, they would wait till the flesh rotted away.
Bone boxes.
And then we go collect the bones, and they would put the bones in a particular place, usually with the family, and then it would be preserved until the resurrection at the end of the world. So, in light of this, it would have been a contradiction of terms for an early Jew to say that someone was raised from the dead, but his body still was left in the tomb. Because some people will say, oh, it was just a spiritual resurrection.
Yeah.
That it wasn't physical. But when this creed says Jesus was buried and then raised on the third day, it's saying quite clearly an empty tomb was left behind. So, let's get into how secure was the tomb. We'll spend a couple minutes on this.
Scripture says it was cemented shut.
It had a seal on it, yeah. So we think it was some sort of mud, cement, concrete, something like that. But here's the way, and they found this from excavations. It says the way the tomb was constructed, there was a slanted groove that led down to a low entrance, and a large disc-shaped stone was rolled down the groove and lodged into place across the door. A smaller stone, I did not know about this, was then used to secure the disc.
I didn't know about a smaller
Like a doorstop?
Yeah, kind of like an extra something.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so it would be easy to roll the big disc down the groove. It would take several men to roll the stone back up in order to reopen the tomb.
Or one angel.
Or. That's exactly right. And so then there's a little bit of controversy about, was Jesus' tomb guarded? Some say it was not guarded. Some say there was, all these Roman soldiers, all these kind of things.
They paid off the soldiers.
Or that they fell asleep.
Yeah,
that was the, kind of narrative at the time. This guy says whether it was guarded or not is kind of irrelevant.
Right.
Because it was secure. But the interesting thing about this is that he says, how do we know that they were Roman guards? Because they asked Pilate for guards, and Pilate says, you have guards. Does he mean I'm giving you guards? Or is he saying you got your own guards, use them?
Right.
So it really could have been either way.
Yeah.
But he does believe ultimately that there were guards.
Yeah.
That there were Roman guards.
Yeah, I was going to say, I believe they're Roman because Jewish guards would not run to Pilate in that situation.
Well, and the big question was, how do you find Roman guards taking orders from Jewish people?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that was, kind of confusing, except for when Jesus was arrested, you saw a whole legion of Roman guards, soldiers, taking orders from Jewish people.
Yeah.
So this whole thing, is all kind of woven together. So then, people say, well, okay, so think about, he says, the claims and counterclaims about the resurrection went back and forth between the Jews and the Christians in the first century. The initial Christian proclamation was, Jesus is risen. The Jews responded with, the disciples stole his body. To this, the Christians said, but the guards at the tomb would have prevented such a theft. The Jews would respond, but the guards at the tomb fell asleep. And the Christians replied, no, the Jews bribed the guards to say that they fell asleep. So if there had not been any guards, the exchange would have gone like this. In response to the claim Jesus is risen, the Jews would say, no, the disciples stole his body. The Christians then would have to reply, but the guards would have prevented the theft. And the Jewish people would say, what guards? There were no guards. But that's not what the Jews said.
It's interesting because we know that the Jewish people, especially the high priest, had Jesus crucified.
Yeah.
And so when the guards ran to Pilate, we know that the guards were told, do not speak of this. And so we could say that is bribery, for one.
Yeah.
But also, too, let's say the guards did fall asleep.
Okay.
Let's say they are asleep. Let's say you two are Roman guards and you're asleep. And now I'm going to try to slide this giant boulder right over here in front of you.
Right.
You're not going to wake up, okay?
That's right.
But I'm going to move this little pedestal and I'm going to move this thing, then carry this guy out. But you're not going to wake up.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Come on.
I know. There's not really, I mean, you either believe the empty tomb, or you pretty much believe nothing at all.
Yeah. Or you'll believe anything in place of that.
That's exactly right.
Well, and I think that kind of points to a lot of these is just people want to believe anything but what actually happened.
Sure.
That's exactly right. So the tomb was empty. Spoiler alert. It was empty. So then
get out of town.
Yeah, no. So then we get into kind of, a little bit of a fringe topic, which is, well, then what about the contradictions in the gospel accounts?
Well, hold on real quick. I did want to point. We talked about everything they put in the tombs with them. Isn't that for the smell?
Yes.
They're supposed to mask the rotting smell.
It's anointing the body.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And we'll talk just for a second about that in a minute, because that's another one of the little contradictions.
Gotcha.
So you get 4 different accounts of the tomb scene in 4 different gospels.
Right.
There's like all of this, it's like in Matthew, when Mary Magdalene and the other Mary arrive toward dawn at the tomb, there's a rock in front of it, there's an earthquake, violent earthquake, angel descends, rolls back the stone. That's Matthew. In Mark, the women arrive at the tomb at sunrise, and the stone had already been rolled back. In Luke, when the women arrive at early dawn, they find the stone had already been rolled back. In Matthew, an angel sitting on the rock outside the tomb, and in Mark, a youth is inside the tomb. In Luke, 2 men are inside the tomb. In Matthew, the women present at the tomb are Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. In Mark, the women present at the tomb are 2 Marys and Salome. In Luke, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Joanna, and the other women are present at the tomb. In Matthew, the 2 Marys rush from the tomb in great fear and joy, run to tell the disciples and meet Jesus on the way. In Mark, they run out of the tomb in fear and say nothing to anyone. In Luke, the women report the story to the disciples who do not believe them, and there's no suggestion that they meet Jesus. What do you make of that?
That's a lot of stuff.
And then John conflicts with much of the other 3 gospels. So
we know John beat the other disciples there because he was the one who Jesus loved. But,
he's also the fastest.
But I think it'd be safe to assume that Mary Magdalene and another Mary, to an extent, were there, that they witnessed it.
You're going to love this explanation. Okay. This is absolutely brilliant. I read this and I thought, oh my gosh, I wish I was this smart. So there's a guy named Michael Martin who put together a big book about how all of these contradictions prove that it's just made up.
Okay.
And he says, with all due respect, Michael Martin is a philosopher, not a historian.
Fair enough.
I don't think he understands the historian's craft. For a philosopher, if something is inconsistent, the law of contradiction says this cannot be true. Throw it out. However, the historian looks at these narratives and says, I see some inconsistencies, but I notice something about them. They're all in the secondary details. The core of the story is the same. Joseph of Arimathea takes the body of Jesus, puts it in a tomb. The tomb is visited by a small group of women followers of Jesus early on the Sunday morning following his crucifixion, and they find that the tomb is empty. They see a vision of angels saying that Jesus is risen. The careful historian, unlike the philosopher, doesn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. This suggests that there's a historical core to this story that is reliable and can be depended on, however conflicting the secondary details might be. So he says we can have complete confidence in this story. He mentions another.
You know what this is?
What?
This is when a police officer asks 2 different suspects, what did you see? And one will say, well, this car bumped into this one, and the other suspect will say, this car crashed into this one. And you'll notice that the speeds that they were going will differ depending on that statement.
Well, in an after-action report, you want to do it hours after, not immediately following.
Well,
because the moment's going to be different.
And he says, in the secular world, if you question 3 suspects and they all give the exact same answer, they're lying.
Because they didn't work their story together. Everyone experiences
It's
things
collusion.
differently. Everyone experiences things differently.
That's true.
That's 100% accurate because we used to have to, Alan, you can comment on this. We used to have to do AARs, after action reports,
Yeah.
in the military,
you go.
and no one's story was exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right.
No one. We had this Army, this Air Force PJ guy. We called him Big White. He was a special force guy, huge guy, right? And his story just got bigger and bigger
Yeah.
every time, and we always messed with him, and he did it on purpose. But no one's story ever was 100% lined up, because I'd be over here somewhere and you'd be over there somewhere. We're experiencing two different things,
Yeah.
but the same event.
Right.
And that's how that just works. I mean, that's just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And he mentions a secular example. He says we have two narratives of Hannibal crossing the Alps to attack Rome.
Yep.
And they're incompatible and irreconcilable.
But we know what happened.
Yet no classical historian doubts the fact that Hannibal did mount such a campaign.
Yep.
Yeah. I like how he takes jabs consistently.
I know.
He's like the philosopher.
I know. It's very, it's these educated people. They're very polite about their insults.
They
right?
are, yeah.
Yeah.
We should take some lessons, man.
Yeah. And so
Oh,
he
I need
says,
to.
are there ways to harmonize any of the differences? He says, yes. For example, the time of the visit to the tomb. One writer might describe it as still being dark. The other might say it was getting light. But that's like the optimist and the pessimist arguing over the weather of the glass half
Full,
empty or
half
full.
empty, yeah.
Yep.
Sure.
It was sometime around dawn.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then as for the number and names of the women, none of the Gospels pretend to give an exhaustive list.
Right.
They just give you examples of some of the people that were there.
And the only time Scripture really gives an exhaustive list is in genealogies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's not
when
what this
it
is.
really matters. And honestly, it doesn't really matter to me.
And then he says, well, Mark never says that the women said anything. He says they told no one. Well, they told Mark.
Yeah. That's why he's writing this.
They might have been silent for a little while, but eventually they told somebody,
Yeah.
I mean, so some of the stuff you just have to just kind of think past the nose on your face.
Yeah.
So
You used that Sunday.
I did.
You did.
I did. I am the light of the world. That's right. Then he talks about, the fact that they were women and women's testimony were not, to be trusted. He says, is their testimony reliable? And he says, actually, this argument backfires on people who use it. Certainly, these women were friends of Jesus. But when you understand the role of women in their society, what's really extraordinary is that this empty tomb story features women as the discoverers of the empty tomb in the first place.
Yeah,
That's right.
back then they would have been like, nobody's going to listen to a woman.
Well, and the fact that they wrote these gospels and admitted
Yep.
that they were holed up in trembling in fear, while the
Behind
women
locked doors.
Yes. Yeah.
they admitted that they were the cowards.
Yep, because that's what I use so many times when I'm teaching is where were the disciples on the third day? They were hiding.
Yes,
Yeah.
they
They
were.
were hiding.
Yes, and the women were the ones who went to the tomb.
The women knew, hey, Sunday morning, this is where we're supposed to be. Let's go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they couldn't do it on the Sabbath.
Right.
They had to come the next day. Old rabbinical sayings say, let the words of the law be burned rather than be delivered to women. They also say, these are rabbis, blessed is he whose children are male, but woe to him whose children are female.
Hey, amen to that, man.
Somebody's going to comment on that, I guarantee.
Hey, my daughter is a little terrorist. I'm telling you, she's crazy, man.
So if the women knew that the tomb was sealed and there were guards around, why did they go to the tomb anyway?
I would say faith.
He says faith. Well, first of all, they were hoping that there'd be somebody that could roll that stone back. They were going to be looking for somebody around that could do that. It was already open when they got there,
Yep.
which is what freaked them out.
They were like, "Where's Barabbas?"
But here's another perspective on this. He says, I strongly feel that scholars who have not known the love and devotion that these women felt for Jesus have no right to pronounce cool judgments upon the feasibility of what they wanted to do.
I
Yeah.
agree 100%.
They were going. They loved him. They wanted to do the thing that was traditionally customary in their day to do.
And especially in that time period when Jesus is going around preaching to women and men, letting you know that women and men are forgiven.
Yeah.
Women and men are, like the woman caught in adultery, for example, right? Where was the man? We talked about this Sunday, right? She was there by herself. And then after Jesus wrote in the dirt, all these people bounced out. And then Jesus said, "Where are your accusers?
That's it.
It's just me and you here. Go and sin no more." And these women would have been all about that.
Absolutely.
They would be like, "This is truly a Messiah. He's fair for everyone."
I mean, one of them had broken basically her dowry. You know, that perfume was her life savings.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's how much they loved it. So one more alternative theory is that they went to the wrong tomb. Oops.
The thief.
Got the wrong one.
It was the thief on the left.
Yeah. This one guy says they got lost, and a caretaker at an unoccupied tomb told them, "You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. He is not here." And they ran away afraid. What do you think about that?
I think it's convenient, but highly unlikely.
See, and
they're just reaching.
Supposedly intelligent people come up with this stuff. It says Craig sighed. That's what he did. He said, the reason is that the site of Jesus' tomb was known to the Jewish authorities. Even if the women had made this mistake, the authorities would have been only too happy to point out the tomb and correct the disciples' errors when they began to proclaim that Jesus had risen from the dead.
Because they would have looked forward to the opportunity to say, he is not the Messiah.
And
absolutely. They were looking for anything they could find.
And also, too, I mean, it's kind of hard. It's like, which one of these tombs is Jesus? Probably the one with all the guards at it.
Yeah.
It's probably that one.
So his conclusion is, the hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead is not at all improbable. In fact, based on the evidence, it's the best explanation for what happened. It is consistent. He says it doesn't contradict science or any known facts of experience. All it requires is the hypothesis that God exists.
Fair enough.
If God exists, then it can happen.
Fair
right?
enough.
Okay. So let's spend the last minutes we have with the third sort of hot button issue. Did Jesus appear to people? Was he seen alive after the death and the resurrection?
Okay.
Because if we're missing any one of these, then it's full of holes.
Yeah.
If he was not seen alive, then I would say that Paul made a great career out of telling fiction.
Well, okay, we're going to get to this in a minute too, but the thing is, you don't make up a religion about somebody who's dead, who was defeated,
right?
And then defend it so bad that you die for it yourself.
Yeah.
That's the part that does not make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you think about these other religions that have been, invented and grown over time. Religions are all ways to explain God or to experience God, things like that. Nobody had to, nobody had to, be martyred and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and I can't help but think about old L. Ron Hubbard when he said that if you want to get rich, make your own religion. And that's what I would imagine. Like, I feel like a lot of these people that create a religion and the leaders in that religion generally gain wealth from that religion.
I'm going to spoil a lot of things for people. Ask Peter. Yeah, pastors are rich, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Peter's walking around with his pinky rings and all this bling bling.
I'm wearing horse turds the size of diamonds, man. Yeah, that's right. And that's the funny thing about it is, all these apostles had successful businesses.
Yeah.
Beforehand.
Yeah.
That's
Paul was wealthy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Not when he
was in prison and everything else.
Shipwrecked, beaten.
Yeah.
Well, when you read about the apostles that were fishermen, these were commercial fishermen.
Oh, and it was their family business.
Yeah, like they were
established.
They had money.
Yes.
Matthew was a tax collector.
Collector.
He had everybody's money.
Yeah.
He did not have much money when. Yeah. That's it.
Like in Peter, when he was crucified upside down.
Yep.
And I tell
refused to be crucified the same way Jesus was.
I tell students this all the time. Judas was the treasurer, right?
Yeah.
Why do you need a treasurer if you're broke?
Exactly.
It's like, I don't need you to count to 5 for me. I know how much money I got. I'm broke.
Yeah.
But if I got some money, I need someone to keep up with it.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah. Well, and it was funny too because it was mostly women who funded Jesus' ministry.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So the last interview is with this guy named Gary Habermas.
Close to Barabbas.
Kind of sort of. He's got multiple doctorate degrees too.
Another fancy pants.
He is mostly a historian.
Okay.
Not
He
a
is
philosopher.
So he's going
That's
to
right.
rely on Josephus.
Actually, he sort of disses Josephus a little bit in
right
this
on.
interview.
Right on.
Yeah. He earned a doctorate from Michigan State University, where he wrote his dissertation on the resurrection.
Wow.
Then he got a Doctor of Divinity from Emmanuel College in Oxford, England. He's written 7 books about the resurrection, and I'm sure they've got a lot of big words in them.
Yes.
Then he wrote In Defense of Miracles, Jesus Under Fire, all these different kinds of things. Super
Sound familiar.
smart, but yet super spiritual at the same time.
Gotcha.
He is currently distinguished professor and chairman of the Department of Philosophy and Theology and director of the master's program in apologetics at Liberty University.
There you go.
So there you go. Okay. So did Jesus appear to people after his resurrection? Okay. So it says, here's how I look at the evidence for the resurrection. First, did Jesus die on the cross? Second, did he appear later to people? If you can establish these 2 things, you've made your case, because dead people don't normally do that.
That's a true story.
That would be a little shocking, a little disturbing.
So this is where we get into 1 Corinthians again. He really drills down on this. He says, I'll start with evidence that virtually all critical scholars will admit. Nobody questions that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians, and we have him affirming in 2 places that he personally encountered the resurrected Christ. 1 Corinthians 9, am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? And in 1 Corinthians 15, which we just read, last of all, he appeared to me also. Mm-hmm. So they get into this little part where they talk about this being a creed. And in the creed, which they would repeat in their worship context, Christ appeared to Peter and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also as to one abnormally born. There you go. So he says this is incredibly influential testimony that Jesus did appear alive after his death. And that's where he starts talking about when this was written, how close to the event it actually, that Paul actually wrote this.
Right.
So Lee Strobel says, convince me it's a creed. Convince me it's a creed. So he says, well, I can give you several solid reasons. First, he introduces it with the words received and delivered or passed on, which are technical rabbinic terms indicating he's passing along holy tradition. Second, the text's parallelism and stylized content indicate it's a creed. Third, the original text uses Cephas for Peter, which is his Aramaic name.
Right.
In fact, the Aramaic itself could indicate a very early origin. Mm-hmm. Fourth, the creed uses several other primitive phrases that Paul would not customarily use, like the 12, the third day, he was raised, and others.
Right.
Fifth, the use of certain words is similar to Aramaic and Mishnaic Hebrew means of narration. And that's just the first 5.
Yeah.
And he says, do you want me to use my other hand?
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a creed. Paul is
Proclaiming this.
codifying this whole thing. So he says, how far back can you date it? We know that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians between AD 55 and 57.
Checks out.
Yep. He indicates in 1 Corinthians 15 that he already passed on this creed to the church at Corinth, which would mean it must predate his visit there in AD 51. Mm-hmm. So it was being used, we know, within 20 years of the resurrection, which is quite early. But then there are many scholars who trace it back even further to within 2 to 8 years of the resurrection, AD 32 to 38, when Paul received it in either Damascus or Jerusalem.
Wow.
Yeah. And so you could say, well, it's not a first-hand account because, he's just repeating things. But actually, keep in mind, Paul personally affirms that Jesus appeared to him as well. Mm-hmm. So this is first-hand testimony.
And the Gospels didn't come about till about, what, 60 AD?
Yeah, they were much later.
Yeah, like 60, 65 AD.
And so where did Paul get this? He got it from the ones who were there.
Had to have been.
The eyewitnesses. Yeah.
Had to have been.
Why does he mention Peter first? Because Peter was the first one who received the news.
Yeah.
Peter told him. James told him. James, we remember, was a non-believer. Mm-hmm. And after he saw Jesus alive, he wrote the book of James. There you go. Whoops. Yeah. So he says, I would concur with the scholars who believe Paul received this material 3 years after his conversion. And he says, Paul describes that trip to Jerusalem in Galatians 1, where he uses a very interesting Greek word, historeo. Why is that significant? Because this word indicates that he didn't just casually shoot the breeze when he met with the apostles, the disciples. This was an investigative inquiry.
Sit down like under a lesson.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was playing the role of an examiner, somebody who's carefully checking this out. So the fact that Paul personally confirmed matters with 2 eyewitnesses who are specifically mentioned in the creed, Peter and James, gives this extra weight.
Yeah.
So one of the very few Jewish New Testament scholars says the evidence in support of the creed is so strong that it may be considered as a statement of eyewitnesses.
You know, I never thought about it that way, but that checks out. Like, that's really solid.
I never imagined that this passage in 1 Corinthians would be the strongest piece of evidence.
Right.
I was like, well,
thought
it's got to be.
Matthew or something. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking too.
But then when you think about it predating the Gospels, then it checks out. Like, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
But then he goes on. He says, Paul emphasizes that the other apostles agreed in preaching the same gospel, the same message about the same resurrection. So what the eyewitness Paul is saying is the same as what the eyewitnesses Peter and James are saying. So now we get to this 500. Appearing to the 500. The Gospels don't say anything about it. No secular historian mentions it. So are we to have red flags about this? 500?
Paul mentions it, don't he?
That's the only place it's mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15. So...
but Paul had to have heard this from the disciples.
Well, it says here, you'd think the apostles would cite this as evidence wherever they went. And in fact, we get back to Michael Martin, the philosopher. Says one must conclude that it is extremely unlikely that this incident really occurred, and that this therefore indirectly casts doubt on Paul as a reliable source. And Habermas, who's kind of a tough guy, you would like this guy.
I like even the name kind of sounds like
I know.
tough.
He says, well, it's just plain silliness to say this cast doubt on Paul. I mean, give me a break. First, even though it's only reported in one source, it just so happens to be the earliest and best authenticated passage of all. Which counts for something. Second, Paul apparently had some proximity to these people, these 500. He says most of them whom are still living. Why don't you go ask them if it really happened? So he either knew some of these people or was told by somebody who knew them that they were still walking around and they were willing to be interviewed. So think about this. You would never include this phrase unless you are absolutely confident that these folks would back you up.
That's very true.
Yeah, because they'd be alive to tell.
That's exactly right. He said, go ask them and see if they tell you the same thing. That's right.
Am I like I know I'm somewhat of a blockhead, but like when I listen to this,
are.
I know, I am, man. But like I listen to this, when I read these stories in the Bible and I see like in 500, I'm like, all right, 500 people. Like, or when I read,
why is that a problem?
When I read the flooded the earth, I'm like, all right, flooded the earth. Like, am I just like a blockhead because I don't find myself going, I don't know about that?
I think it comes down when you're reading scripture, and this is a battle we all fight every day. It's whether you choose to believe it or you choose to question it.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a confirmation bias.
Yeah.
You go into it looking to confirm what you're already biased to believe.
But can you not, I'm sure you would agree with me, that the more when I don't understand something and I go looking at it, I realize that I was looking at it wrong.
Yes.
You know, like every time it's a Pat problem.
Yeah.
It's not a scripture problem.
But
it's a Pat problem.
But if you're a well-educated atheist, you're never going to say it's a me problem.
Right. Yeah, you're trying to. It's because that's what I've thought about that when we go through this stuff and we get into, like say a very educated man. He's like, well, this, that can't be right. And dude, when I read it, I'm like, all right, it's scripture. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, and see, here's the deal. Like with this one, he said, there's only one source. There's only one source. But then, okay, so it's like
For me, if it's scripture source, I'm like, that's the only one source that I need.
That's especially if it's like the best information. I mean, he says this is an example of how some critics want it both ways.
Yeah.
Generally, they reject the gospel resurrection accounts in favor of Paul. They don't want to hear the gospels.
Yeah.
They want to hear Paul, since he is taken to be the chief authority. But then on this issue, they question Paul and go to the gospel
because he's saying what they don't want him to say.
You know what's really interesting though is you look at any culture's historical account, right? And they are notoriously wrong.
Right.
Until you get to scripture. And that's where these other cultures have notoriously went against scripture and been proven wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you look at American culture, right? Like we always think Paul Revere did the Midnight Ride. That's what we're taught in school. And that's the thing. No, it's not. It's a guy named Beth Israel.
Yeah.
That's
But that doesn't rhyme.
right. And because poetry is what was the thing of the world, right?
Yeah.
Columbus sailed the sea to prove the world was round.
1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Except 20 years before that, the globe was invented.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that, right?
Yeah.
But it's this thing. These educated people who take a historical narrative and never look at the common sense facts around it.
Well, and that's it. One of the reasons you can accept things at face value is you're a practical person.
Yeah.
Certain things work and certain things don't.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're looking for all the nuances and you're like, 500. How would Paul have known about 500? And
It
why
was
does
492.
Well, and then it's why don't the Gospels say it? Well, if the Gospels don't say it, then it must not have happened. But you don't believe the Gospels.
Well, see, and that's
So-
I think mindset is a big thing. I'm not when I read the word, I'm not reading it to disprove it.
Yeah. You're
Right.
trying to gain something from it.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Yes. Like I'm like, what is it going to show me? What is speaking to me from this?
And like I said earlier, it's usually when you have that enlightenment period, it reveals something that you saw wrong.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Usually it's like, I thought it was this, but now I see that it was this.
Or you see something wrong about life, and it actually enlightens you about something that's true about life.
I feel like you have to be insanely arrogant to read scripture and be like, no, that's wrong. All the scholars were wrong. All this is wrong. This thousands of years of history are wrong. This is wrong.
I have a buddy of mine who talks about procrastination all the time. And
I was going to, but I just kept putting it off.
well, what he says, and when you said arrogant, it made me think of this. Is he always says procrastination is the arrogant assumption God is going to give you the opportunity tomorrow to do what He's told you to do today.
It's very true.
And I'm like, ouch.
Yeah, that's
Stop
a good
meddling.
punch because
Yeah, I was like,
I procrastinate
ouch.
terribly.
Yeah, I was like, that is so freaking good. That is so good.
I agree.
Dang.
So the question then was asked, where would 500 people be that Jesus, and he said, well, it could have been in the countryside. Matthew says Jesus appeared on a hillside,
This is festival time.
Well, and then they said, well, wouldn't Josephus have mentioned this? And this is where he dogs on Josephus a little bit. He says Josephus was writing 60 years later. Mm-hmm. So either Josephus didn't know about it because it was, kind of, in the secular world dying out to some degree, or most likely he chose not to mention it, which would make sense because Josephus was not a Jesus follower.
Right.
So
He was a Roman.
So you
He's a
can't
Roman Jew.
expect Josephus to start building the case.
Right.
Josephus does say that it appears that everybody is saying that this man rose from the dead.
Yep.
He acknowledges that much.
He was very much a CNN reporter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And did some incredible work.
Yeah,
we can gain a lot of insight from Josephus.
He documented, but he didn't do it from a believer standpoint.
Yeah.
Right. But this guy says this account meets all the demands of historical reliability that could possibly be made of such a text. Mm-hmm. I mean, according to historical standards, this is all you really need.
Yep.
When you combine it with all of the external evidence.
I agree.
So, I want to get to this one last thing before we try to wrap up here. There's so much more in here that this Habermas guy is.
Habermas. That's just fun to say.
I know.
Habermas.
He talks. Oh gosh. Yeah, he talks about Acts.
Okay.
So if you read through Peter's sermon in Acts
5. Acts 5, Acts 8.
Let's see. Let's just go there just for a minute. We got a couple minutes, don't we? Have a couple minutes?
Oh yeah.
It's in Acts chapter 3 or 2 going into 2. It is in 2, only in 2. But he says, he goes into the whole prophecy and everything else like that. And he says, Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in your midst, just as you yourself know. This man delivered up by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. And he quotes David. He's talking about, you will not abandon my soul to Hades, nor allow thy Holy One to undergo decay. You have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence. And so he says, brethren, I may confidently say to you regarding the patriarch David that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us. And that with us means it's full. His tomb is not empty, which is
You can go dig it up and verify.
yeah. And what does that imply about Jesus' tomb?
It's empty.
He's speaking of an empty tomb.
Yeah.
And so, because he was a prophet and knew that God had sworn to him with an oath to see. Anyway, he goes on and talks about David. But he says, hey, let's not forget the content of Peter's sermon.
Right.
It's not, it's not historical evidence in that he gives blow-by-blow descriptions, but he's saying essentially the exact same thing that Paul is saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
So maybe you can't consider that a source, but boy, that sure backs up what Paul has to say.
You got that right.
I mean, it really does. So I want to finish with this. He says the resurrection was undoubtedly the central proclamation of the early church from the very beginning. The earliest Christians didn't just endorse Jesus' teachings, they were convinced that they had seen him alive after his crucifixion. That's what changed their lives and started the church. Certainly, since this was their centermost conviction, they would have made absolutely sure that it was true. He goes on to talk about Mark's missing conclusion and talks about the alternative theories, that they're legend, that this is a good one, that they were hallucinating.
500 people?
Yeah.
That's
Right
some
on. Good party.
Little bad tea, man.
Yeah.
Yes.
We didn't cover that in taboo.
They had some of those Hebrew mushrooms.
Yes.
But then he goes into evidence from a psychiatrist, says that people don't hallucinate in the same way at the same time ever.
Or it was a Mandela effect.
Yeah, maybe it was that. Yeah, you never know. But he says this thing right at the end. Okay. He says, Jesus was killed on the cross. Alexander Metherell has made that graphically clear. His tomb was empty on Easter morning. William Lane Craig left no doubt about that. His disciples and others saw him, touched him, and ate with him after the resurrection. Gary Habermas has built that case with abundant evidence. As prominent British theologian Michael Green said, the appearances of Jesus are as well authenticated as anything in antiquity. There can be no rational doubt that they occurred, and that the main reason why Christians became sure of the resurrection in the earliest days was just this. They could say with assurance, we have seen the Lord.
Yep.
They knew it was he.
And here's my thing about, this has always been my thing about Scripture, is do we know Washington Cross of Delaware?
Of course we do.
Well, we weren't there.
No, we weren't. You weren't there when he was the president. How do you know he was the president?
How do we know?
No.
Yeah.
Well, he's on money, okay, but still, how do we know? Only thing we know is what's documented for us.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's no different with our faith. It is no different. It's what's laid before us. You choose to believe or you don't.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to.
Which that's what the people that I almost feel like guys like our philosopher friend that we talked about here.
Right.
They're educated beyond their good.
Yeah, but I heard this great phrase is ignorance out of the mouth of educated people is still ignorance.
Yes.
That's just that.
Truth out of the mouth of fools and children.
It's still true.
But that's
true.
what they get too smart for their own good kind of thing. They just, and everything, faith, I feel like really challenges these people because it takes faith.
It does.
You can't just
But
lay it out.
It honestly takes faith to not believe it.
It does
as well.
It does,
especially when you're confronted with hard evidence.
Yep.
But this guy says the best. This is in the conclusion of the book, and I love this little paragraph. There's a guy named J.P. Moreland. He's a Christian philosopher. He's on the good side of philosophy. But this is beautiful. When Jesus was crucified, his followers were discouraged and depressed, so they dispersed. The Jesus movement was all but stopped in its tracks. Then, after a short period of time, we see them abandoning their occupations, regathering, and committing themselves to spreading a very specific message: that Jesus Christ was the Messiah of God who died on a cross, returned to life, and was seen alive by them. And they were willing to spend the rest of their lives proclaiming this without any payoff from a human point of view. They faced a life of hardship. They often went without food, slept exposed to the elements, were ridiculed, beaten, imprisoned. And finally, most of them were executed in torturous ways. For what? For good intentions? No, because they were convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that they had seen Jesus Christ alive from the dead. Yes, people will die for their religious convictions if they sincerely believe they are true. Religious fanatics have done that throughout history. While they may strongly believe in the tenets of their religion, however, they don't know for a fact whether their faith is based on the truth. They simply cannot know for sure. They can only believe. Mm-hmm. In contrast, the disciples were in the unique position to know for a fact whether Jesus had returned from the dead.
Yeah.
They saw him, they touched him, they ate with him. They knew he wasn't a hallucination or a legend. And knowing the truth, they were willing to die for him.
And matter of fact, every one of them except John died a martyr's death.
Yeah, they tried to kill him in a pot of oil.
He said he wouldn't. He said, "Nah, I'm good."
Yeah, ain't going to do it. So that, to me, if you're looking for practical evidence, that's the strongest piece of evidence that we have.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. Is you got people that is talking this message and they keep going for the rest of their lives, literally to the point of death.
Would an atheist give his life up for to prove that he's wrong?
Is that a challenge? Should we bring one in, Tom?
Yes, I think we should.
Well, that's kind of what I wonder sometimes, because we've always been told, like in youth group, hey, if somebody held a gun to your head, told you to denounce your faith, would you do it?
Yeah. Like
if somebody did that to an atheist, would say Jesus is Lord. Just say it one time.
Yeah. And
but see, if they don't believe anything, they ought to be able to just say, sure, yeah.
I think these are conversations we should be having, though, because, like you said in youth group, we say, would you do this if someone put a gun to your head? No, you wouldn't. I honestly believe a lot of people would not proclaim Jesus, but I also believe a lot of atheists would not deny him.
Right.
At that time point. In all reality, it comes down to a heartfelt choice. We make mental choices all the time. What does the science say? What does pop culture say? What does logic of today say? We make these choices. But when it comes down to choices of the heart, you can't really deny them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if it comes down to your life on the line, you got to go with what's in your heart.
Well, isn't that what happened at Columbine?
Yes, it is. That's one of the most famous proclamations of all.
Yeah.
What would happen if you were in that situation and you just got, I'm going to save my life. You say, Jesus isn't real. And they shot you anyway.
Yeah, right.
Man, that'd be terrible. That'd be my luck. I'd be like, I'm going to save myself. Yeah. And then you die, and then you get to heaven.
And Jesus is standing on the shore around the charcoal fire. And he's saying, you love me?
No, it's just one of these. You still get into heaven, but as you walk by, he slaps you in the back of the head.
Yeah. Oh. He's like, hey, what was the last thing you said?
Yeah. You remember that dunce?
What was that again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
That was.
Yeah.
I'm glad we ended on such a happy note. Man, I'm glad I went through Clean Monday.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what Easter's all about.
Yeah, there it is. Yes. There it is.
Man.
Okay, so we're recording this on Tuesday, which is no kind of,
Yeah, Tuesday was kind of the just random day.
Yeah.
It's Spy Wednesday Eve.
It's Podcast Tuesday.
Podcast Tuesday.
So tomorrow is
Spy Wednesday.
And
then Monday, Thursday.
Yeah.
Then Good Friday. Everyone's off work.
Yeah.
And if you're not, your boss is going to hell.
Yeah, there you go.
What if you work for yourself?
then you're going to hell.
But wait, can you just work until sundown?
There it is.
Can I
There
move
it
a
is.
chair? Can I like take the chair with me? Move it a little bit at a time?
Yeah. What's the least amount I can do and still
Right.
be okay?
Yes. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we want to know what other kind of questions you have,
Yeah.
because this is super fascinating stuff, and this is really meant to it's not meant to convince anybody, because
Right.
if
Yeah.
they're already convinced one way or the other,
Yeah.
just a few words we say on a podcast, but oftentimes people, sometimes you're confronted with these things.
And you know what would be fun?
To have Richard Dawkins on the
Yes,
show.
it
Yeah,
would.
I would love that. But I'd want them in a boxing match. What I want to know is, sorry, tell me the best and worst reasoning for that you've heard about the gospel not being real.
Oh yeah.
Like, what is the worst thing someone has told you that's just off the wall crazy? And what is the case that actually made you question it or made you think?
I
Yeah.
think that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And there's so much more that we can't cover in just an hour and a half.
Yeah. For real.
So, hey, if you have more questions, just leave them in the comments, and we'll respond back to you.
Yeah, comment below, and I, like I said, let us know questions or topics you'd have, because we're going to be gearing up, I guess, now for a new
We're
lineup.
gonna
New
figure it
series.
out.
Yeah. New
Yeah.
series after this.
I tell you, one that really does intrigue me is the New Earth,
Oh yeah.
like the
Young-
afterlife kind of thing. No, not the age. The like
New heaven, new earth?
new heaven,
Okay,
new earth.
okay,
that
okay.
that afterlife aspect, which I'm a weird revelation guy. Like
I've had a lot of people ask me, would there be hunting in heaven and things
you
like
said,
that?
of course.
No, I
Of course
said,
there
of
would.
course not. I was like, no, if that's what your picture of heaven is, then you're going to
Yeah.
be disappointed.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there's spear fishing or spear hunting. In heaven.
I don't know.
That could be cool.
We've been reading the Easter like stuff to my kids.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
got the eggs, read the thing.
Yeah.
Last night I was like, we'll read them that. And I told Marcy, I was like, for some reason I said, let me introduce Levi and them to the dragon. So I went to Revelation. I read them because
Oh man.
my son, he's a typical Esau boy, so I knew he would like they cast the dragon out. But it has changed my perspective reading that and talking about the woman with the crown, and
I
then
know.
the tail sweeps the stars out.
Yeah.
Like I'm reading that and I'm like, man, it's all talking about the lineup of the planet.
It
and stuff.
sort of ruins a little bit, doesn't it?
No, now I'm not like, my son's like, whoa, a dragon, and I'm like, well, yeah,
Yeah. No, just let him believe it. It's okay.
Yeah,
He can believe it for a long, long time.
yeah. Because I'm telling you right now, Revelation is it's 1 out of 66 that everyone gets hung up on.
I know.
And I would say you could probably agree with this. It's one that I've had the most questions on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to do to do Revelation.
We will.
Look, I love Revelation because the imagery is insane.
Completely. It's absolutely amazing.
It is. All right, guys, do the things. Comment below. Again,
Yes.
comment if there's a book or something of the Bible you'd like for us to dive into. Comment that below.
Yeah.
Anything you have.
We've got a
Comment.
couple of things in the pipeline. We're
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to look into, but yeah, we want to know honestly what you'd like for us to be completely reverent and rebellious about, because we want we're it's what we're all about.
We
So,
are not afraid
No.
to go into
Yeah.
any waters. I feel like
Exactly
we've pretty
right.
well
Yeah, we'll
proven that at
cover
this
it
point.
all. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys.
do it.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Yeah. Catch
Merry
you next
Easter.
week.
All right.
Merry Easter.